Hey folks, welcome to the channel. I'm agnostic, so I have no problem hearing either side of the fence, none. I'm not looking for anything to be proved to me because I'll use my own mind and plug in all the bits of information that come my way through these videos and many of the seminars that I listen to. I used to run in a fundamentalist Christian circles about 3 decades ago. I'm very familiar with the way in which that mindset works. Didn't take me long to work my way out of it because I didn't like the oppression and not to question and such. But that's in a pretty hardcore fundamentalist group. But right now I'm looking at the idea, did Jesus actually exist? I know who Robyn Walsh is because I've done a reaction to her once or twice already. And I, of course, know Bart Ehrman. He and I have emailed back and forth a couple of times. And Robyn, maybe she has her doctorate under Bart Ehrman, but she's certainly associated with him in some capacity because this is from Bart's channel. So I hope Bart's doing well. But did Jesus actually exist? And my understanding has always been, not because the texts say it, but because outside writings allude to Jesus very much having been an historical figure. Obviously, the departure for a lot of people in Spanish, the punto de partido, the point of departure is that he was born from a virgin and then he was raised from the dead after being crucified and all that stuff. And people have a problem with that depiction of him, but was he an actual human being who walked planet Earth? There's pretty substantial evidence that he was a man.
So what kind of evidence do we have? Let me start with Paul. I personally find this the most convincing. Paul, in his genuine letters, mentions James and Peter. So the disciples of Jesus in Jerusalem, James, Jesus' brother. It would be extraordinary if Paul made this up. And also, it doesn't actually help his case most of the time because it seems like these guys didn't get along. And so Paul would have traded off of the idea that he's an exclusive authority, or maybe he wouldn't have been so harsh about James and Peter if they had actually gotten along and tried to trade off that association as part of his authority. But he doesn't do this.
Paul didn't get along with a lot of people. And he withstood this one to his face and this one. And he was just very, very, let's say, strong-minded, opinionated, dogmatic, in-your-face type of guy.
And so why would there be people in Jerusalem following a guy who never existed? It just really doesn't stand to reason. Then the Gospels, to what extent do they have an oral tradition or not, especially the canonical ones? Do they possess that? I'm not certain. Luke gives some hint that he's talked to people who have those experiences,
right?
But of either seeing Christ or talking to people who did, eyewitnesses, that's another subject too. But I think that combination of Paul's testimony and the degree to which we can think that the Gospels reflect in later generations an awareness of Jesus as a person, that's probably our best evidence. Now, what evidence do we have outside of the Christian ambit? So, say, Romans reflecting on the Christian movement and on Jesus.
Right.
I would identify 4 points to consider. And none of them are slam dunks, but again, in the aggregate, I think that we can feel as though we have more evidence than not that Jesus was a historical person. The first is the Jewish historian Josephus.
Right.
Josephus was captured during the Jewish War by the Flavians, and he was tasked with writing a history of the Jewish people. In the course of writing this, I think in 2 places, chapter 18, he mentions Christianity and Jesus. But the way he does it is questioned by some scholars because it sounds a little bit like theological formulae that you would find from Christians in later centuries. And Josephus largely survives to us because of the history of the Jews that he tells. It was relevant to Christianity, and so Christians preserved him, even though, again, he himself is not a Christian. He's writing for pagan emperors. He is capturing an image or an impression, a history of the first century, at the very least of the Jewish people, relevant to the study of Christianity.
Much like
Now,
Luke.
he also mentions John the Baptist. So this is where things get a little bit complicated because let's say the theological formulae calling Jesus the Christ, for example, that's awfully odd for a Jewish person to do, to be like, oh, the Messiah came, by the way, and I'm going to say nothing else about it, right? So that's what he says about Jesus, but he mentions John the Baptist too. So personally, so this is my theory, I could see that maybe there was a legitimate passage about Jesus in Josephus potentially, or one that was, and fussed with, one that was tinkered with, or one that was legitimate that was amplified because the passage about John the Baptist, scholars don't question. It sounds like Josephus, it's his kind of language, it fits with the theme.
Yeah.
There's no theological formulae there. Now imagine you're somebody preserving Josephus for the purposes of Christianity, and there's a passage about how famous John the Baptist was, and either a incomplete or no passage about Jesus. You're going to probably fudge that one a little bit, and that seems to be what we have.
All right. I like the way she's developing this because it's inferential and rather than dispositive. And that is where, like, the original name of the channel, which I've thought about going back to, Thinking Theology, it's about the thinking part. And when you look at arguments, a lot of arguments are inferential. Like the doctrine of the Trinity is 100% inferred from scattered verses in the Bible. There's no direct mention. The word Trinity itself doesn't appear in the text, so it must be of inference. So you look at the way arguments are framed, the way they're formed, the way the person standing in them is forming them. I love how she even prefaced this whole thing by saying, there are 4 bits of evidence out there, none of which is a slam dunk, but in the aggregate, they make a pretty solid case that Jesus existed. But she's exposing her way of thinking. She's exposing the inferences she's drawing, and you can decide whether or not they seem reasonable. Pretty straightforward.
So complicated, there could have been an original core there, something about Jesus similar to what we find about John the Baptist, but we can't quite be certain, but I can tell you that we do have passages about Jesus in Josephus. What we do with those, again, open question, something else we can talk about. I'm going to lump together the second example, 2 Roman historians, Tacitus and Suetonius. They're both writing a history of various Roman subjects, the emperor's Roman history. And in the course of that, they talk about Nero, the persecutions of the what we would assume are the Christians, but they use terms Christus and Crestus, almost like a game of telephone. They have it kind of right. And so when I teach about Tacitus and Suetonius, they're writing in the early 2nd century, I don't tell my students that this is necessarily reliable information because, maybe they have just the names wrong, or maybe they're talking about somebody else. We can't be sure.
Right.
Also, there's reasons to question the way that the persecutions under Nero are framed in those passages. So again, complicated, not a slam dunk, but something that we can add to our roster of evidence for at the very least maybe something that is the Christian movement, the Jesus movement. So even if it's in early 2nd century and it's not quite fully formed in the minds of the Romans, there's a hint there that something is going on.
And that, it's common with names, especially, it's not presentism and it's not even anachronistic, but it is when you're dealing with other cultures, especially those that go long, 2 millennia prior to the one in which we currently live. Like you can look at Luke in the beginning where he's like, "O Theophilus." Theophilus basically means beloved of God. Now, is that directed to one particular person, or is it directed to a whole bunch of people? And it's one of these things that as a Bible student or as any literary student, you would say, okay, it would be good for me to know this. So then you look for other information that might point you to whether or not this is a generalized account for a lot of people, or if it was just undergone or undertaken to give this one person an organized account of those things that happened before us. So in this case, Christus, Crestus, is that a specific person? Is it a group of people? In one sense, in this context, it doesn't matter that much, but in another, it has more weight if it was, in a sense, meant for a lot more people, because a broader audience is less likely to be fooled or interested in that regard. So I'm sure Robyn, if she should see this, she can weigh in on that, whether that is a proper statement to make or not. But let's see where we go from here.
And then around the same time, usually dated to about 112 or 113, are the letters of Pliny and Trajan. Pliny was a
Elder.
governor in Bithynia Pontus, so the northeast part of the empire, and he's writing to Trajan, who's the Roman emperor, and he is arresting people who are called Christians. And when he does so, he actually asks them to confirm that they see the emperor as an authority figure. If they refuse to do so, he gives them a second chance. If they still refuse to do so because they're obstinate, he is executing them. So he writes to the emperor to make sure that's cool. And he says, yeah, go right ahead. Now, this is strong evidence, again, in the 2nd century, that there was a movement of some kind based on a historical figure that has started to really gain steam to the point where now they're blipping on the map of the Roman authorities. Now, there are also reasons to question this passage. In recent years, scholars have started to note, kind of like what I was talking about with Josephus, some of the language in Pliny's letter doesn't really match how he talks in his other letters.
Yeah.
So let's bracket that for now, because this is a little bit of a new movement within the field to question those letters in particular. But as I say, while not a slam dunk, in the aggregate, each of these little pieces of information coupled with, as I mentioned, the letters of Paul and the Gospels, give us more evidence than not that Jesus was a historical person.
All right, I wonder if she's the heir apparent to Bart because she has students. No, I don't know if she is a PhD candidate or if she's on her way to the chair of the department. I think Bart's at UNC, University of North Carolina. He himself, I think, used to be more fundamentalist or a proselytizer, and over time, research will do this. You can develop questions. A lot of things can cause you to develop questions about anything the longer you live, and then a lot of things can confirm things for you as well. It works both ways. Now, Bart and I was not aware of his research or his work when I was undergoing my observations that things textually did not add up, like the Bible being the Word of God. When you see the people in the Bible itself, Paul, Luke, others saying expressly, I'm giving you my thoughts. Or Luke in the very beginning, verses 1:1-4, when he said, many others have given their account, so I did my research and I'm giving you my account. And you're like, that doesn't sound like dictation from God, that this is going to be the organized Word of God. This sounds more like, writing an account of the civil rights marches and movement in the 60s in America or what have you, like any event anywhere in the world that you do your research and you present it, okay? But you're not being dictated by God to just take stenography and just sort of dutifully write down these precise and super angelic words. So in that sense, Bart and I, he has his way in which he became agnostic, and I did as well. But and I'm not sure where Robyn stands on this either. But in one sense, it doesn't matter because arguments have to stand on their own merit, regardless of the fervor with which somebody presents something or not. It still needs to stand based on rational, logical grounds, if you will. It just has to pass the sniff test. As Judge Judy says, it just has to make sense. If somebody's case doesn't seem to add up, something's wrong there. It's like, okay, fair enough. So I love the way she presented what she did. It was very measured, very well thought through for the most part. I mean, I like, her style. Let's put it that. I like Bart's style too. So anyway, leave your thoughts, guys. You don't have to agree with it, but it isn't the worst thing to take advantage of the available research. And people who spend decades of their lives studying things present things to you in consolidated form. And it's like, oh, I'm getting the advantage of such condensation. So I'll take it. All right, guys, have a great day. See you on another video and keep thinking philosophically. Hey, folks. If you want to take the personality test that I created for my life coaching practice, which is based on the book that I wrote, put your phone up, turn it on camera, and focus on this, and it'll take you to it. And it'll take you about 20 minutes to complete the test. It's free, and you'll get some information on your personality. It's quite detailed, quite revealing. It's kind of fun as well. And I'll be leaving this QR code up on the wall behind me for my regular videos. So I hope you take it, and I hope you enjoy it.